So we're back. Here we are. We need to have boundaries and jurisdictions in our home. I know we've heard this like so many times, and I know that my boundaries are not the same as my sister's boundaries or my friend's boundaries. So these are areas that parents should have more control of than their children, and it doesn't mean that children can't ever have an opinion or influence these areas. So I made a list. Okay, so finances, anything that has to do with finances, anything that has to do with the money that comes in and out of the home, and maybe even programs that you put your children in, those decisions, the ultimate decider should be the parent, not the child. And I know we are seeing a lot of child-centered homes out there. We're seeing a lot of homes where children are making all the decisions, and extremes are dangerous. So I'm not saying children can't ever make decisions on these things, but if we go to the extreme where my kid is always deciding on where we're going to go eat, or where they're going to, what activities we're going to do as a family, or what movie we're going to watch, we are handing more power to them than what they can handle, and it could be dangerous for our children. Schedules, circle of friends, chores, movies, music and books, education and foods, all of those things. Parents know what will keep their children healthy and happy. And as for chores, I've seen parents give, really hard or difficult tasks to young children, and they think that their children can manage those well, and then maybe 2 weeks go by and the child is absolutely fed up with it. We have to be wise. I've done it to my kids before, so that I'm speaking from experience. We have to be wise with how we manage these things in our home. And then we have the young children. So young children can choose, what toys to play with, how to coloring their, in their coloring books, what to draw, what colors to use, clothing that they wear. And of course there's an asterisk, because if we're going to a party or a wedding, my child is not going in jeans. So we do want to adhere to cultural norms, and we do want our kids to stay safe. So I put nature. Every time we go out and we go for walks, my kids are free to pick up lizards. They're free to jump. They're free to enjoy nature. They're free to run. They're free to it, all within reasonable boundaries. We want to teach them to be free in nature, but we also want to teach them how to be safe in nature. Sometimes we live in Florida, so if my child goes out back and he wants to go swimming in this pond, we never know what's going to pop up and grab him. So we have boundaries, and we don't allow our kids to play out back anymore, since it's gotten really flooded and there's like a lot of rainfall during this season, and we have a huge pond in the back now. So they can only play in the front yard. But every family has their own boundaries and jurisdictions. Mine's look a little different than my sister's or my friends', like I said. But if you see that your child is getting aggravated, frustrated, because he can't have something his way all day, then it may mean that you need to pull back a little and teach your child to acknowledge that you are the parent and decision maker. So formation of habits, and I believe this is where we kind of left off on how habits are formed. And we know there are good habits and bad habits. Tidy and orderliness is a good habit in my views, but in my teenager's views, she says that being too tidy will not help her, be creative. And she knows when she has everything in its spot, and even though it doesn't belong there or doesn't necessarily fall into that category, but she knows it's there, she says that it helps her to be more creative. So if you have an artist or someone with that type of personality, their tidiness is going to be different from your tidiness. We want to teach our kids the habit of prayer. Talking to God is important. Greeting others. I mean, for me, I grew up where we had to say hi and bye. And our culture even greets with a kiss. So for us, a kiss on the cheek is a greeting, and it's in a hug, and it's what we do. And whenever someone doesn't acknowledge that someone else is present, for me, it's like a big deal. So each family has their own norms, regarding this. But positive self-talk. All right, we want to teach our kids to speak positively to themselves. We have 60,000 thoughts a day, I heard. And we want those thoughts to be positive. We want them to be, children to know that they're doing well, to develop self-confidence. Seeking ideas. We want them to explore, to research freely, meaning when they're not doing something, when they're not assigned to a task, that in their own free time, they are seeking knowledge and within the resources that you give them, right? So opening and closing things. I mean, I once did a whole training session on opening and closing the front door because my kids were leaving it open. And I think it's funny, but how many adults do you know open the cabinet door and they don't close it? So it is something we have to teach our kids at a young age. Put in clothes in the hamper is another thing. Putting clothes and towels where they belong is a big deal in my home. Attentiveness, how to pay attention, how to get into the habit of not just letting your mind wander off into daydreaming, but paying attention to what's going on around you. And then there's a whole list of bad habits, and it's kind of like the opposite of what I'm saying about the good habits. So we do have impulsiveness and inattentiveness, and those are bad habits. Those are just, in my home, when my kids don't pay attention, it just sends me back to those days where they were very young and I had them around me, and I was just, teaching them every single day and playing games with them on how to pay attention because it was so important to me. Idleness, when you have a child that just doesn't know what to do, just doesn't know what to invest their free time in, and they just tend to lie around, or they want to oversleep or indulge in TV. Those things we need to nip in the bud, because if we want our kids to be productive, they have to know how to manage their time. And of course, this is different in the ages, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So how are habits formed? Habits are formed when the mind receives a positive, negative, neutral stimuli from the external world or environment. So sometimes even a neutral stimuli can help form a good or bad habit. Your central nervous system inputs information coming in through your senses and activates a series of neurological processes. Your neurons begin to react through electromagnetic waves, proteins, and chemicals to these stimuli. So all of this is going on in your brain. Your brain is just shooting out stimuli, and they're just shooting out all of these, firing these darts around, and it never looks orderly. It looks so disorganized. Neuropsychologists look at the way the brain works. It can be really interesting. So the brain begins to process this information, building a network of roads which lead to a thought, which then lead to an action. So I read a book many years ago by Dr. Jane M. Healy called Endangered Minds: Why Our Children Don't Think and What We Can Do About It. So she was, I believe she wrote this in the 80s, and it's still very relevant today. And she says that thought patterns are formed through daily interactions with people and ideas, like a road system in a developing town. So basically, you can start to develop a town. It might have one main road, and then little by little, they're going to keep forming roads to branch off of that one main road. And they're going to build other main roads too, to make a connection to your destination. So how many of you have been driving around town and you took the wrong route to the store, for example, and then the next week you go to the same place and you keep getting lost like you did the first time? Hasn't that happened to you? It happened to me various times before GPS. And I just would get lost again the same exact way, because that's the way I learned it the first time. And it took me a few times to unlearn it. So habits are kind of like that too. If you learn a bad habit the first time, it is so hard to get your child to unlearn that habit. So it's better to teach them the good habit the first time. Now, if you are now realizing that this is an issue in your home and your child is 10 and they have a series of bad habits, don't worry. Our brains have plasticity, they're flexible, they learn new things. You can learn new things when you're 50 years old. So our children's minds and brains do have a time in development where it's easier to learn something, but it doesn't mean that in the future they can't learn it. So don't worry about it. Awareness of habits is so important to teach kids how to be aware of what they're doing and their actions. And how do we teach them how to be aware? And I'm going to get into that soon. Charlotte Mason says, the mother who takes pains to endow her children with good habits secures for herself smooth and easy days. On the other hand, she who lets habits take care of themselves has a weary life of endless friction. So this is where I left off at the conference. 3 ways to transform bad habits into good habits. First of all, create an atmosphere where your child feels accepted, loved, nurtured. Create an atmosphere that's peaceful, that's not threatening to them in your home. Charlotte Mason says atmosphere is 1/3 of education. It's an instrument at the disposal of the educator to encourage thinking. It should be comprised of love, protection, open communication, godly living, and courtesy towards others. So how important is the atmosphere? Super important. Right now, we kind of got this routine going on at home where in the mornings we want to do our routine, but we added exercise and worship to it, because I think that prepping for the day and preparing through exercise and worship is so important, because everything falls into place afterwards. Planning things, having the right music in the background, having your kids greet each other, they all feel welcomed and accepted when they wake up in the morning, because they hug each other, they greet each other. Some of them wake up on the wrong side of the bed, but that's another story. But when they do, what did I do this morning? One of my kids woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and I started tickling her, and we started laughing, and we created a fun atmosphere, a happy atmosphere, just by me not getting angry with her because she was upset. But I decided to do something different and tickle her. So an activity, engaging in activities and prolonging the time by adding or building up an idea. Okay, so we want our kids to be engaged in life, right? We have the flexibility, because we homeschool, to do that. So If your kid feels like he's adhering to a system or a curriculum for 5, 6, 7 hours a day and he's in first grade, he's not going to be a happy kid. So shortcut methods don't allow lasting memory and understanding to develop. It is the persistence of sustained thinking practice that solidifies the learning. So if our lives are so busy, guys, get this. If your life is busy, you're always on the go, and you don't have time to settle down in your home, your kids are not going to be able to settle into thinking that's going to be conducive to learning. They're always going to feel threatened that they have to get up and go. They have to leave their activity. They have to leave what they're doing. They're always being interrupted. We're not allowing them to even dive deep into forming hobbies or forming habits that are going to be lasting and help them acquire knowledge. Scripture, so important. All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in the righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So, we use scripture every day in our home to teach, to rebuke, to correct. Over the years, I've learned some verses. I don't ever know the numbers, but sometimes I do. But I've learned some scripture, and it's what I recite to my kids in the present. So if I'm correcting them at the moment, not in the future where they don't even remember what they did wrong. At the moment, if I am somewhere, I have to take them to the restroom, I'll take them to the restroom or the car and correct them. And they have to know that what they did was wrong. Now, after a while, your kids are going, after like 7 or 8 years old, they are going to understand all of that much better. But before that, it's a lot of repetition, and not like I sometimes hear people just reciting scripture back and forth and with their kids, and their kids are like, I just don't understand what mom's talking about. She's just telling me all this, all these scriptures, and we really do have to sit down and teach them, and it takes time about what it is we're saying. How do children learn? Okay, so here are the parts of the brain: the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, brainstem, cerebellum, occipital lobe, and parietal lobe. This so brings me back to college when I took psychology. But each part of the brain is supposed to be very specific to what it does. Some functions are responsible for memory, some are language, vision, balancing, coordinating, problem solving, all of that. It is important to understand our child's brain. And here are some left brain and right brain functions. And I'm just going to let you read that over. And if you want to pause it, you can pause it. So, how many of you have heard of Dr. Caroline Leaf? Dr. Caroline Leaf is an amazing neuropsychologist who came out with some research recently. And there's her website if you want to go into this information. It says, we are thinking beings and we think all day long. Thinking builds thoughts, and thoughts occupy physical mental real estate in the brain. Thinking properly will produce understanding and build good thoughts, which are the same thing as memories. Conversely, bad thinking produced by Jeopardy TV quiz style quite literally make the brain toxic and dooms learning. Okay, so when we begin homeschooling, we really don't know what we're doing. We don't know how to go about this, so we buy a curriculum, we buy books, we start to dive into those, which is great. I'm not against curriculum and books, but sometimes we overload our children with information. And think about it. Thoughts are mental real estate. So what type of thinking do we want our 6-year-old, to indulge in all day? We want them to memorize all this stuff for a test, or do we want them to have fun with their learning and be able to work with their hands, build stuff, do crafts, and just attribute whatever it is they're learning to something fun. And that way it'll stick easier. Diane Kraft, she speaks of the 4 gates of learning blocks, meaning sometimes our kids have a block which is not allowing them to learn. And it's usually reading. It interferes with reading and writing, and it can even interfere with math. But here are 4 different blocks that she speaks of. Visual motor. And this is for that child who has trouble writing. They're great storytellers. They're great at mental math, but they reverse their letters, their numbers, and they have trouble keeping track of what they're reading. So their eyes just wander off and they can't concentrate on it. So they won't read more than a paragraph or 2 without getting tired. So that is a visual motor issue. I'm sorry, that's the writing issue. The visual process is the reading one. So someone who has trouble reading, they start good, but then later, after like 4th grade, it's like hard. It's labored. And they get eye fatigue. They get tired of reading. Someone who has a block in attention, they might be inconsistent in performance. They may need help with their work. They're forgetful, impulsive. They anger easily. They have sensory issues. I have some of these issues with my own kids. And there are therapies that parents can do at home with their kids that only take 20 minutes on her website. And then we have the auditory block, which they have trouble remembering rules. They have trouble remembering phonics. They misunderstand information. They try to guess when they read. And they have trouble with their times tables, with their math. So all of these blocks are real. And I know, I tend to think that if my kid is not good at math, maybe God didn't want them to be good at math. And I just accept a lower grade, not a lower effort, but a lower grade from them. I expect the same effort as all my other kids who are good at math, but I understand that sometimes the gift God gave our kids and the talents He gave them do not align with some subjects. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to expect anything of them. We have to be careful that we're not being neglectful with their education. Now, the visual is important. Reading is important. If out of all of this, all my children learn is how to read, then I've been successful, because now my kids can research. Now they can read books. Now they can read things online, and now they can start formulating ideas and opinions of their own. And that is so important, that our kids understand, what they're reading. And of course, I cannot transfer my knowledge and my thoughts to my kids' brains, and you can't either. So sometimes we want our kids to know this stuff. We want to just like push it in their brain, and remember, they are the ones in control of rejecting the information or receiving it. So sometimes we can spend a lot of time trying to get this information in their head and repeating it over and over and having them take tests. And we're forgetting what the overall goal is in homeschooling. We want our kids to develop their gifts and talents, and we want them to be happy with what they chose for themselves. And that is so important. So Piaget talks about development, and he talks about stages of development. Now, this is so important because if we don't know these stages, we kind of begin to expect things from our 6-year-old that aren't ready to learn. And we have to be careful. Just because your neighbor's 6-year-old knows that or does that doesn't mean your 6-year-old is going to be ready for that. So we know that babies focus on sucking and grasping. They have a reflex to do these things. So everything that they know, all the knowledge that they pick up when they're babies is really through their mouth and their hands. Everything they touch and everything they suck on, and they start to perceive things in their own way, in their own world. And remember, they really do think they're the center of the world until they're like 6 or 7 years old. So if your kids are 3 and they're fighting over toys, prepare yourselves, and because they're not going to get over that until much later. All you can do is make sure that you're not allowing them to hurt each other, but also talk to them and always in a gentle way correct them and have them go in the right direction. So they're developing language. Sometimes young kids are the way they are because they don't know how to express themselves, because they don't have the right words to tell you what they're feeling, because they don't even know what they're feeling. So we do have to consider that they are young still. They are not adults. We are the adults. So we need to behave like the adults. So concrete operational is 7 to 11. Here we can start really teaching our children. And so I don't even like to get into formal teaching until my kids are much older. My younger ones just tag along with the older ones, and it's always worked for us. And they've gained, information through that, tagging along with the older ones and learning with the older ones that they wouldn't have if they didn't do that. So multiple perspectives. They begin to see that not everyone thinks like them when they're 7 to 11. Reversibility and identity. They begin to understand concepts, how they're affected by variables. Reversibility. They begin to understand that if they step back, and go in the other direction, they can understand these things better. Classifies objects, classifies concepts, makes combinations. Formal operations, 11 plus, permutations and combinations. These are little scientists. This is where they really begin to use the logic that they have. They begin to understand symbols, laws of probability. They manage hypothetical situations. They understand systematic rules. They understand abstract concepts. And it's so funny how many of our elementary schoolers today are just being put through an education that they're not developmentally ready for. And in our own homes, in our own homeschooling, we can do the same thing. Our kids may not be developmentally ready for something. Okay. and we still want to shove it down their throats. Well, we have to be careful with that. Responsibility and freedom. Okay, so we know that responsibility leads to freedom. And we want our kids to have freedom, not now, but in the future. We want them to be well-rounded, educated adults that make wise decisions. But we cannot get in the way of all of this. We have to be very careful that we are not putting a burden on ourselves that's not ours to carry. Now, our kids are not a burden. That's not what I'm saying. But when we try to force or try to spoon feed more information than what they really need, and try to answer questions that they don't really need that until they're probably 16 and they're 6, and you're over here giving them, I've done it before, giving them more information than what they really need. You are overburdening yourself. And that's why there are so many people who are burnt out. They are burnt out because they are overdoing it, and they are just given too much information that will come natural to them over time. Margaret and Willard Beecher, authors of Parents on the Run, stated, "The parent must gain freedom from the child so that the child can gain freedom from the parent." Think about that for a moment. If you never get free from your child by transferring responsibility, then the child remains hopelessly bound to you as well. You have knotted each other in a paralyzing interdependency that stifles growth and development. And of course, again, we're considering the ages. I don't want my 18-year-old, I don't want to be like, okay, so now you can leave the house and go do, your own laundry and cook for yourself and maintain your own home. If I've never taught them those things, and I never taught them how to be productive in those areas and those important life skills, I want my kids to leave my house knowing how to survive, knowing how to cook. And all of that is important for us as parents. I hear parents all the time, I want my kids to learn that. How do I do it? I'm like, well, you have to teach them. And that's where they're like, oh, well, I'll just put them in a class. No, you as a parent have to teach your children how to do those things. It's okay to outsource sometimes. It's okay to put your kids in a cooking class for fun. But truly, they're going to learn these things in their own home. And they're going to give you so much over time when you start weaning them off of you. Remember, young children are always attached to you, and it's okay. But in the long run, you want them to begin to explore their world. And without you, you have other things you have in mind that you want to do. You have errands and chores that you are responsible for. And our children have all the capacity to be free and independent for part of the day. I'm not saying all day, but part of the day. So one of the best things we can teach our kids is to develop good habits, to be aware of their thoughts, to be aware of the people, what they're saying and how it's affecting the people around them, and to be helpful at home. All of those things are so important to teach our children. So when we don't understand why our kids are doing something, remember you're the parent. It's your job to observe, to research, and to find something that works in your family. Well, thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, email me at homeandheart@yahoo.com. I would love to hear your questions, your comments. Thank you so much for viewing this video, and I'll see you next time.